It's Miss Skevious or Mrs. E here to read you a chapter book today. Roald Dahl is one of my favorite authors, so I thought I would share this book with you, The Twits. I'll read a few chapters every day and post them for you to follow me along with this story. While I'm reading, you can close your eyes and try to think about the pictures that are happening in the story in your head. Feel free to get a piece of paper and a pencil and make some doodles. I like to do that sometimes while I'm listening to reading. Or you can just sit and enjoy the story. When we're finished, I have a fun little writing activity that we're going to do together. So, sit back, relax, and enjoy The Twits by Roald Dahl. Chapter 1. Hairy Faces. What a lot of hairy-faced men there are around nowadays. When a man grows hair all over his face, it is impossible to tell what he really looks like. Perhaps that's why he does it. He'd rather you didn't know. Then there's the problem of washing. When the very hairy ones wash their faces, it must be as big a job as when you and I wash the hair on our heads. So, what I want to know is this. How often do all these hairy-faced men wash their faces? Is it only once a week? Like us, on Sunday nights? And do they shampoo it? Do they use a hair dryer? Do they rub hair tonic in it to stop their faces from going bald? Do they go to a barber to have their hairy faces cut and trimmed? Or do they do it themselves in front of the bathroom mirror with nail scissors? I don't know. But next time you see a man with a hairy face, which will probably be as soon as you step out onto the street, maybe you will look at him more closely and start wondering about some of these things. Mr. Twit. He's one of our main characters that we're going to be writing about today. Mr. Twit was one of these very hairy-faced men. The whole of his face, except for his forehead, was eyes, and his nose was covered with thick hair. The stuff even sprouted in revolting tufts out of his nostrils and ear holes. Mr. Twit felt that this hairiness made him look terrifically wise and grand. But, in truth, he was neither of these things. Mr. Twit was a twit. He was born a twit, and now at the age of 60, he was a bigger twit than ever. The hair on Mr. Twit's face didn't grow smooth and matted as it does on most hairy-faced men. It grew in spikes that stuck out straight like the bristles of a nail brush. And how often did Mr. Twit wash his bristly, nail-brushy face of his? The answer is never. Not even on Sundays. He hadn't washed it for years. There's Mr. Twit. Dirty beards. As you know, an ordinary unhairy face like yours or mine simply gets a bit smudgy if it's not washed often enough. And there's nothing so awful about that. But a hairy face is a very different matter. Things cling to hairs, especially food. Things like gravy go right in among the hairs and stay there. You and I can wipe our smooth faces with a washcloth, and we quickly look more or less all right again. But the hairy man cannot do that. We can also, if we are careful, eat our meals without spreading food all over our faces. But not so the hairy man. Watch carefully next time you see a hairy man eating his lunch, and you will notice that even if he opens his mouth very wide, it is impossible for him to get a spoonful of beef stew or ice cream and chocolate sauce into it without leaving some of it on the hairs. Mr. Twit didn't even bother to open his mouth wide when he ate. As a result, and because he never washed, there were always hundreds of bits of old breakfasts and lunches and suppers sticking to the hairs around his face. They weren't big bits, mind you, but because he used to wipe those off with the back of his hand or on his sleeve while he was eating. But if you looked closely, not that you'd ever want to, you would see tiny little specks of dried up scrambled eggs stuck to the hairs, and spinach and tomato ketchup, and fish sticks, and minced chicken livers, and all the other disgusting things Mr. Twit liked to eat. Ugh, gross. Hope you don't eat like that at home. If you looked closer still, hold your noses, ladies and gentlemen. If you peered deep into the mustachy bristles sticking out over his upper lip, you would probably see much larger objects that had escaped the wipe of his hand, things that had been there for months and months, like a piece of maggoty green cheese, or a moldy old cornflake, or even the slimy tail of a tinned sardine. Because of all this, Mr. Twit never went really hungry. By sticking out his tongue and curling it sideways to explore the hairy jungle around his mouth, he was always able to find a tasty morsel here and there to nibble on. What I am trying to tell you is that Mr. Twit was a foul and smelly old man. He was also an extremely horrid old man, as you will find out in a moment. And that is where we're going to stop for today. Next time we join each other, we'll be reading about Mrs. Twit, so we can find out all about what she's like. So if you take a look at my board here, if you'd like to do this activity, you can. Otherwise, you can just join me for the next chapters. This is Mr. Twit. I drew my own picture of him, and I left his beard empty so that you guys can decorate his filthy beard with leftover food and candy and his gross little particles from breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So if you'd like to draw Mr. Twit and leave his beard empty, you can go ahead and decorate his beard with whatever filth you'd like. Something else you could do after we read these chapters is you can write about what you found inside of his beard. Write a story about all those nasty things you found in there. Another thing you can do is you can describe Mr. Twit using adjectives. So that's something you know from school. Adjectives describe things, right? Like filthy, dirty, foul. All of these things would be good descriptions or adjectives for Mr. Twit. So if you'd like to do one of those writing extensions, feel free. Otherwise, I will see you next time for more reading of the Twits. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you later.